Welcome, everyone. This is the Women's International Music Network. I'm your host, Mickey Angeline, and this is our live Front and Center podcast. And so excited to have our guest. She's an old friend of the Women's International Music Network, but I feel like we haven't seen each other since the in-person NAMM from before in 2020. She is our pioneering artist and visionary musical weirdo. I welcome you, Beatie Wolfe. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Mickey.
I'm like stumbling over my words. I told you I'm learning how to people again.
I get it. Hey, peopling is hard.
And I'm digging your studio, by the way. I asked you before we went live if this was your studio. What is it? Point out a couple of those things in the background. You've got so much going on.
Yeah, I mean, like if I wish I had longer arms and I could just like pull things off. You've got, I don't know if you can see, but up there is a little like flyer for this exhibition Mark Mothersbaugh and I did of these postcards like that were sent in from all over the world ahead of the 2020 election. We created this mail art campaign asking people to make a card, send it in to support USPS and all the stuff that was going on. And it was amazing. We ended up getting like tens of thousands of these cards, doing an exhibition that ended up in the Smithsonian, which was crazy. So yeah, that's kind of cool. My mom, I have a copy of my mom's punk book, which was the first, apparently like the first UK, well actually I think in general, the first book on punk rock, as it was emerging from the UK in 77. So she did a documentary and a film. It's also why I'm wearing the polystyrene shirt, commemorating that. And yeah, space. There's a lot of like mylar. I'm kind of obsessed with mylar. I ended up one of the innovations was this NASA grade mylar wrapped space chamber, anechoic chamber that you could go into and using a coin operated viewport, the kind that you'd look out to sea, that would take you into the world of raw space. This anti-stream I created from the Bell Labs chamber. And that was part of a V&A exhibition I did of my album designs in 2018. So stuff to keep me kind of inspired and, stuff that makes me smile. And
yeah. Well, going back to the postcard thing, because my daughter and I were one of those 10,000 people that mailed in the postcards. I remember you doing that. That was so incredible. And we did arts and crafts, gluing things onto ours and writing special messages before we sent ours in. So thank you for doing that. That was pretty punk rock.
It was awesome. And like we're still getting them. They're actually cards are still coming in every now and then.
Wow.
Mark sends a few that have it's really cool. It's super cool. But it was so amazing, honestly, seeing all the different expressions, like multimedia wise, but also in terms of like what people were saying. It kind of has become like a time capsule of like all the stuff we went through, because it was, there was a lot happening in the last couple of years. And so it's like looking at the cards is like this amazing reflection of that time in our history.
We did live through history. And like I mentioned before, COVID years feel like dog years. It doesn't feel like it's been 2.5 years. It feels like it's been a lot longer. I think that happens when you have to sit with yourself in your house and you're not going to work and you're not going places and you have all this time on your hands and you never allocated for that. And now you're relearning how to kind of just be with yourself. Did you find that happen to you, or were you just still busy creating during the pandemic?
The thing I found was time is such a bizarre construct anyway. Like I'm always sort of fascinated in time and space, and it felt like what came in during that COVID period was this potential for expanded time and space, without sounding too esoteric. It sort of felt like it disrupted our linear sense of time, human beings' linear sense of time, which actually I felt like, despite all the difficult side of it, I felt like it was a really good thing, because I think technology in the digital era has really fast-tracked what it means to be a human being on this planet without really reflecting the costs in the fast-tracking process. So it's like we suddenly have all this access, but no real value. We have a lot of noise, but curation has been kind of lost in that mix. And so, and I think our relationship with art, the value of art and the natural world have been disrupted within that digital, that massive digital, rise. And so almost I think COVID was like a reset, or like it provided a chance to really take a step back and figure out, well, what does matter and what is important and what am I putting my energy into, and what's all the stuff that one's just been doing on autopilot and not really thinking about the ramifications of like traveling a lot, or all these things that can just become very much a part of our day-to-day lives, but maybe we do need to rethink.
Right, you nailed it. I think there were two things that happened. There were people who either embraced it and did what you said with the reset, or really just became lost. I mean, for myself, I'm one of those people who always had things planned and had every minute of every day scheduled. And when I was left with none of that, I had all this time on my hands, and I was kind of going through a thing anyways, and so it worked for me. And I realized I needed to set boundaries for myself. I needed to put myself first. I needed to figure out what was actually of value and what was just buying time and wasting time. So I agree with you on that one. Okay, so now, didn't you accomplish a couple of more things before we get to the really cool thing, which is that bioplastic vinyl? I could swear you did like a couple of more things in the last like probably 17 things, but like a couple of more things in the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the thing that was nice about COVID time, again, not COVID as a pandemic, but before that, there were very specific projects that were still around a continuation of rethinking the album experience for the digital age and creating this ceremonial, tangible, story-led experience, which was what I did the exhibition of at the V&A. So there was still this line of pursuing that, and then with the pandemic, it naturally like got rid of like stuff that we were planning, just then got cancelled or whatever. And actually, it ended up being this period where I mainly worked on this environmental project, which is very dear to my heart, which began as a song I wrote in 2006 after seeing An Inconvenient Truth, a song called From Green to Red that, leaving the cinema as a teenager, I was just so angry and wrote this track, but also thought, well, I don't have to record it because everyone's going to see this documentary and we'll be on a totally different path. And then that didn't happen. So, a couple of years ago, I was giving a talk about my work at NASA's JPL, and one of the engineers comes up and shows me these atmospheric CO2 graphs dating back 800,000 years. And I had this same moment as I had in the cinema of like, what the fuck? Like, how are we here? And realizing that data is so cold for so many people and we just can't really absorb it, particularly on that time scale. That became this project called From Green to Red, which was essentially taking that data and translating it into this woven timeline of the planet, this interactive timeline that shows human impact and rising CO2 levels. And, that ended up being presented at the Nobel Prize Summit, where I was speaking after Sir David Attenborough and Al Gore, projected onto COP26's conference center as the largest visual statement of the climate conference, and then installed at the London Design Biennale in 2020 or 2021 as this interactive installation where people could move their hands over the fabric and pull out the specific carbon ppm and planetary timeline date. And, a number of those things, like the Nobel Prize Summit was virtual because of COVID. and the exhibition I didn't even get to see because of COVID,
Oh,
along with the exhibition that Mark and I had of the cards. Like neither of us ended
oh,
up being
that's
able to see
right.
it.
Oh,
So it was funny because actually the last couple of years ended up really creating this space in maybe the bigger project map where then I could focus on, these two things that were really important for me, like the environmental aspect of the work, and also the activism. Well, I guess activism in both senses with the postcards project and this climate data project. So yeah, those two projects have been very key, very central, and then the environmental work has kind of, I guess, spawned out, and so there are a number of other things I've been working on in that space. And before the bioplastic record, it was actually really lovely. My music was asked to be, or I was asked to have my music included in this global seed vault, but for music. So the idea is that, like with seeds, we take, seeds globally that we want to protect and have for future generations. These guys were putting together the equivalent for music, and the idea was to encode the data, huge amounts of data in glass, but in this cold data way, where essentially it's only when you need it that you're then accessing it. So it's in very ecological, very green, and then that piece of glass with all that data encoded into it is then stored in this vault in Svalbard. And so, along with the International Library of African Music and all these other wonderful collections of really globally cornerstone works, my music went into this vault. So that was pretty cool.
what will explains why Wired magazine has named you one of 22 people changing the world because you really are. And that's why I'm sharing your website as you're explaining all these amazing things you do. I was looking for the postcard one as you were mentioning that, but I failed my part to find it, but that's all right. We can move on to the nitty-gritty, and that is world's first bioplastic record that you have a song on there along with Michael Stipe of REM. Please, please, let's get into this because
Okay.
this is the most amazing thing ever.
Well, I'm holding up my hands. This is someone else's project. I am super honored that, they wanted me and Michael to be the artists, I guess, that represented it. It was working with Evolution Music, who very much have been pioneering this bioplastic release for years now, and figuring out how to do it so that it looks and it sounds like PVC, which is hugely carbon intensive. And so, yeah, it was working with them, and then Earth%, which is Brian Eno's environmental charity, because Brian and I have done a few things in the environmental space together. So it was a track of mine, actually, the song that I performed at the Nobel Prize Summit, which was also encoded in glass, but otherwise doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So I love the idea of actually this record is the place where it tangibly lives. And then a track from Michael called Future If Future, both very much in the environmental, what the fuck are we doing theme. And yeah, it was lovely. It's been like a joy to be part of it. And I think because of the combination of creating these new formats for music, which, is a big part of the work I've done over the years, and then also the environmental aspect, and realizing that the digitalization of music also led to its devaluing and its commodification, and the fact that we really do need ceremony and tangibility and storytelling aspects to music and all art forms for those to actually go in and imprint and be part of us. So I'm constantly thinking about how we take the best of the old and the best of the new, and don't it's not just about innovation, and it's not just about being nostalgic. It's about really knowing what to reclaim and what to update. and always having that bridge and that sense of, you know, the best of both worlds. So this project was very much like an embodiment of that.
Yeah, this and then okay, so there were only how many were made? Like 200 or 500 or some small number, and they
Five
sold out.
500. They sold
That's
out
what it
like
was.
yeah. I mean, I there were a number of people I knew that were trying to get them, and
Oh, I'm looking at it right now.
it
After
went.
coverage within 5 minutes, and I was one of those lucky people who was able to order one. And that's only because like I said, I wake up at 3 a.m. for work. So I was like, I am ordering this amazing thing right now. I mean, I had my phone, I'm in bed. And then turns out, but bam. So now that the physical is gone, can people order it any other way? Or is it just completely just, we're good?
Well, I think I don't know that like there may be another small pressing.
Okay.
Who knows? We will see.
Right.
It was digitally also available for the time
Okay.
that it was physically available, which was not very long. Um, but you know, I think also that thing of value and of limitations, like we really need, human beings really need limitations. I think when it comes to imagination, we need to be limitless, but when it comes to like, you know, creating something, physical limitations, I think really important, and also access, you know. So the reason I think that it really did resonate with people is this is a great story, but also like, yeah, there are very few being made, also because it's still actually quite hard to make them. So there's something about that, those limitations that really make it feel special, which it is.
What a good point. You know, I forget about that. We live in such a digital age. The thought of what I'm going to say from, would it be millennials on? Probably have very little memory of anything being limited to them. You know, as far as being able to get anything you want in a quick amount of time, knowing you're right, when we set limitations, it does add value. And it adds nostalgia, it adds memories. It's you're right because I'm back to collecting vinyl again, though I've collected vinyl when I was younger, when it first was, you know, the whole thing, and I still have those records like when I was 12 and 13 years old, and I still have them, and I'll play them, and they sound all scratchy and stuff, but I love that because that brings up memories of I remember when I first bought it, I remember which store it was at, I remember the first time I heard the song on the radio, and I had to go out and get it. I feel like the generations now just they've lost that sense of what's the like that anticipation, right? I don't know.
Delayed gratification, man.
Yes,
Delayed
there it
gratification
is.
is a wonderful thing, and
Delayed
um,
gratification.
and the, you know, human beings as well, like that. You know, you think about so many of the ancient structures and cities and cathedrals, and how someone could work on something for their whole lifetime and not see that realized. You know, they knew they were part of something bigger. And you know, now we want it all now. We want instant feedback. We want to put something out and get something back immediately. And I think that delayed gratification is really not to be underestimated. And you know, you're talking about the, like, always remembering those records also evoking memories and stirring memories. And I feel like you know, from that shift from physical to digital, the three things I identified that we lost, which I really feel are key to something going in deeply and staying with us and setting up a kind of presence so that it really does stay with us. Um, Tangibility, some sort of tangible component, storytelling, you know, the ability to tell a story through that experience, and ceremony, you know, having this space around whatever it is that you're doing. And like a record fits into that framework very clearly, you know, the ceremony, tangibility, storytelling. But I feel like you could apply that to anything, you know, art, poetry, any medium. You know, actually those components are really what allows something to go in so that, when we're 80 or 90 or whatever, and, we open up Abbey Road for the first time, it's like we are 7 again. And there's this whole stored sort of memory, a sensory memory that is incredibly powerful.
I have to ask you because I realize I don't think I've ever asked you this. How old were you when you realized this was the path you wanted to take, where you were combining music with saving the world and science and becoming this innovative musical weirdo? When did that, I mean, were you always like this and it just took a while to come together, or was it like a ta-da moment in like high school or middle school?
Well, I was always weird. Really, very, very much so. And I was always musical. So I guess, those two things were always there. I think for me, storytelling, like I loved storytelling in whatever capacity, putting on plays, drawing, songwriting. Storytelling was really the mode that I gravitated toward. And it was, I guess, as I got older, it was just that feeling of, in the same way that I felt boxes were so limiting, and you're this or you're that. You go through education and you're very much told that you're either good at maths or you're good at music, or there was no real, or I felt like the education system really lacked that Renaissance approach, where actually these things would go hand in hand. You'd be a philosopher and you'd be a musician, you'd be a mathematician. So I I feel like I just didn't understand those limiting factors, or those very narrow lanes that you were meant to stay in if you were one thing or another. And I was often also way more interested in the space between. So even now, when people ask, "What are you?" It feels like that's why I guess musical weirdo and visionary, which I did not say about myself, but that's why it kind of stuck, because it sort of conjured up something. But I feel like what is interesting is the space between those fields. So I do work. I am a musician, but I end up working with scientists, and I end up working with doing stuff within health and technology and design and all these other different areas. But actually, it's the dialogue and the bridging between those worlds that the work to me exists in, and feels like that's where things get exciting.
You're just constantly reinventing things and paving your own, like just creating your own path. I absolutely love it. I stopped on this on your website while you were talking, because would you believe it's been 2 years this month was when we had our podcast interview on my personal podcast. And we talked about this, the
Oh
360
yeah.
Air live stream, which was, it was like you on your phone, you could turn 360 like you were in the room. I remember that. And you talked about, wasn't this the room where it was so quiet you could hear your blood flow, I think you said, or your heartbeat or something to that effect?
Yeah. It was the quietest room on earth for 40 years. It was the first ever wedge based anechoic chamber. Anechoic simply means without echo. And so it's completely echoless, EQ-less. There is no reverberation. Sound is as pure as it gets. And I went in there because I was working with Bell Labs on a different project, and one of the engineers said, "Oh, I've got to show you this environment, this room. I think you'll love it, but you can only stay in there like 20 minutes because you'll hear the blood rushing through your veins and probably get freaked out." I mean, that was typically the experience that engineers had. They could only stay in there for very short periods of time. And so I went in this room expecting to run out after 15 minutes. Ended up staying in there several hours. I've now spent over 100 hours in that room, and I just found it to be so deeply peaceful and restorative, and it really made me realize how noisy life is, this world is, how much stimuli we have around us all the time, hitting our sensory systems, bombarding us, and how music and art have very much become part of that background noise. And so I had this idea to create an anti-stream of our current streaming, the antithesis of our current streaming culture. This was back in 2016. And so then going into this environment, this anechoic environment, immediately the anti-stream and the anechoic space came together in my mind. And Raw Space, which was the record that I was working on, ended up being this, anti-stream from the Quietest Room on Earth, which was also the world's first live AR experience. And so it was this record player playing the album 24 hours on repeat for a week. People could log into this beautiful ceremonial space and hear the music in this pure, focused way. Couldn't shuffle, couldn't fast forward. Then as they were exploring the room, the lyrics would be streaming out of the vinyl, the artwork would be surrounding you and taking you into the visual landscape of each track as it was happening in real time. So it was like this Fantasia world that was opening up around you. And honestly, that was what I experienced opening up records as a kid. Like, I just felt already with the whole vinyl gateway, you had this whole multi-sensory world that was coming to life, and it was something that the digital era had disrupted. So this was like a reinterpretation of that.
You nailed it again, and I put the link in the chat room for those that are watching, want to check it out, because I can't play it because it's copyrighted, and then this will get muted because that's just what social media does. But I remember that. I love how you, I don't want to say force people to be present, but it welcomes you to you have to be present in a moment. You're right. You can't fast forward it. You can't take it away. And I remember, I'm glad you brought that up, because when you watch this, you see the music dancing off of the record. It's intensely amazing. And I've talked with people who have mentioned rooms similar to this or like this, and they don't know that they could ever be in a room where you can hear your own heartbeat. I think I'm at that age where I'm like you. I would cherish to cut all that noise out. I'm so over noise. That was probably one of the things about COVID that I was able to truly appreciate and embrace, was the quiet, because the world outside got so quiet too.
Absolutely. Well, because I think on a physiological level, what it does to us, it does make us constantly more on edge. It's like we're wired. It's like we are getting overstimulated sensorially. But then also there's this commentary on music and how much we now use technology to iron out the imperfections, to take out the humanness. And in that anechoic environment, music is as raw and as pure as you're going to get. Like, there is nothing to soften the cracks. There's nothing to, mask the human aspect of it, which I love, because it's like the antithesis of how a lot of modern music has become, which is, much more reliant on technology to take out the aspect which I think is the most interesting, which is the imperfect aspect of it.
We had a comment here I'll share with you. Is it Cecily Anderson? One of my favorite things about music is the space in between.
Yeah, I mean that is absolutely true. It is the space between music that allows the music to be, in the same way as it's the space between the bars that holds the tiger. And the thing that was so fascinating in that, to her comment, being in that environment, the space between the notes is so extreme. It's almost like it drops off. You have a note and then you have this crazy silence, and so it changes the nature of the music in this really interesting way. I mean, that was, so to bring it full circle, that was where John Cage and Rauschenberg and all these experimental people did these projects in the 60s, and the program was called Experiments in Art and Technology. It was a way of the engineers learning from the artists learning from the engineers, that Bell Labs had with these experimental artists. And that project Raw Space that I was talking about actually rebooted, the EAT program. So that was really cool.
You're always doing the most amazing things, Beatie, I swear. So as I was like, as we're closing this up, I'm going to pose a couple questions to you. Number one, where do you see the environment, music, and science going in the next 5 years? I'm going to pick your brain. And then what do you have, if anything, coming up, either by the end of this year or the beginning of 2023, that we should look out for?
Okay, well,
there we go.
Just getting comfortable on the chair. So you said the music, the environment, and
because this is where you live, is music, the environment, and science. Where do you see it progressing? Where do you see it? I mean, the change that could be happening, especially now that we're coming out of COVID and people have had to learn how to be human again, and learn how to be better humans.
So I would say that music, which is really art, and the environment are the two things that are core to our humanity on a keeping us alive inside level. Neurologist Oliver Sacks, who I adore, who actually was the reason I went and did this music dementia philanthropic research project, which is a whole other story. But he really identified, there are two things that we need. And he's a traditional doctor, but he found outside of pharmaceuticals for extreme neurological conditions, there were two things that were really as powerful, if not more powerful, medicinally in their own right, and that was nature and art. So I really see that as those are the pillars. We can't forget that in amongst all the technology and innovation and feeling like we're advancing and doing better, and I would say that actually the greatest technology exists already in the natural world. Human beings are not gonna invent anything close to what is already out there in our home, but often that we miss or we haven't caught up with. I think a lot of it is human beings have to catch up with the intelligence and the interconnectedness and the beauty and the art of nature. So science is lagging behind. Indigenous wisdom was much more where it's at, and so actually, modern science or Western science or whatever one wants to call it really needs to start deeply looking to indigenous wisdom if it wants to be anywhere close to the truth of things. So I feel like the work that I do is really about bridging areas that are maybe usually disconnected or siloed, hopefully being a bridge across these different disparate spaces, and using the power of art to humanize things that maybe are quite unrelatable or cold, like 800,000 years of climate data, and representing it in a different way that allows it to go in and imprint, like records and music could do and has done when it has those right components that we talked about. So yeah, it's almost like what can we reclaim, and where can we be innovative, and always bringing those two things together, and being very discerning about that.
I swear I could listen to you talk all day. So then, do you have anything coming up?
Oh yeah, sorry, there was a second question.
No, that's okay. I was absorbing that. I was like, man, so correct. So on the nose. But do you have anything coming up either by the end of this year or beginning next year that we can look forward to from you?
Well, Mickey, a lot of the time, all of the stuff that we talked about was never part of a plan. It was a wonderful detour. So I often don't like to know what's next because it ends up not always being what is next. But at the moment, there's been a project I've been working on with Noah and a few other organizations and nonprofits and Taylor Guitars actually as well to kind of shine a light on these incredible ecological initiatives that are happening in California that maybe we don't know about, that are hidden in plain sight, using the guitar as a vehicle to look at abalone and this rewilding initiative that Noah is doing for abalone and kelp along the west coast because of the huge decimation in the population, or looking at rethinking the urban landscape, planting the right trees in the right locations, which then instead of becoming mulch or tinder at their end of life cycle, where then all the carbon is released back into the atmosphere, they're becoming guitars. And so this way of actually using the guitar as a vehicle to tell these stories about these environmental local initiatives that are happening on a grassroots level that are really important, because as much as it's the bigger picture 800,000 years of climate data, it's also the micro local really kind of grassroots stuff that's super important. So that's a project that is close to being finished, and then I'm working on a brain installation that's going to be at the London Design Biennale next year, which is essentially like remapping the brain, a way of thinking about the brain differently, but also taking people in to the brain, and specifically an artist's brain, but then that term is as broad as we've discussed, and showing how we're not just one thing or another. We're not either a scientist or an artist. We all have these multi-streams going on in our brains simultaneously. So to break down some of the barriers that I think exist on a level of thought.
That seems like a lot, and I cannot wait. That is so cool. You're like, kelp, abalone in the brain. I feel like that could be a title of a song or an album. Kelp, abalone in the brain.
Yeah,
what do these three things have in common? And I hope to see you soon. We as we close this out, to let people know if they don't know, I got to meet you because we honored you with the She Rocks Awards, which you reminded me was 2020. Why did I think it was 2018? It was the last in person before COVID, and we realized that what all of us thought was anthrax was probably COVID because it was January 2020. And then I feel like I haven't seen you in 100 years, but it's only been like 2.5 years. So hopefully, if not this year, I can see you by next year, because you're an awesome person to be around physically. So you've got a great aura, you've got great energy, and
well, you too. And yeah,
thank you.
physical, tangible, in-person experiences are really hard to replace. And yeah, that event, that was a wonderful event. It was so wonderful to be a part of it. But also, you told me that you'd been honored like a few months ago. So
I was.
yeah,
Our 10-year anniversary. It was a big surprise. Thank you. And so Cicely says that I don't know, Cicely. I don't know what she can't do. Beatie does everything. You do have a lot to binge. If you're looking for things to binge, please go to her website, because endless amounts of amazement that just blows your mind and widens your perspective, which is why we love talking with Beatie all the time. This is Live Front and Center podcast with the Women's International Music Network. I am your host, Mickey Angeline. We used to do these a lot, but it has been an in-between, so you can look out. We also have our She Rocks Spotlight series. It's coming out, with the next one's in November. And we will be doing She Rocks again at NAMM in April 2023. I really hope, I mean, I know you don't know, we don't try to plan more than a month in advance. It's hard for me to plan, and other than having to be to work, I'm right there with you. It's like, you want to plan something with me? Ask me day up. See how I'm
Well,
feeling. But hopefully, I would love to see you if you're going to be at NAMM. And of course, She Rocks Awards would love to have you out there again.
wonderful. Well, yeah, I very much hope to be there. And yeah, I think plans can often just get in the way of what we're actually meant to be doing. And I feel like it's always in the detours. You know, the exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum, in many ways, it was a presentation of a series of detours because, like, no one of those projects was really in that period of time what I thought I was going to be working on. So I feel like it's really important to have the parameters open and, you know, not have the shutters up so that maybe you're working on something, but something over here is like trying to pull your attention, but you're like, no, I have to do this, because I feel like it's often in the you know, the side route areas that things get interesting.
I'm doing more and more of that myself, allowing the universe to kind of guide me and following not fighting the wave, I guess we can call it, right? Riding the wave.
Yeah,
The wave of intention. Well, thank you so much, Bea. It's always wonderful to talk with you.
it's wonderful
And
to chat with you, Mickey.
And like I remind everybody before we end this, please, beatiewolfe.com. She's got a lot of content. And like I always end every show, every day that you wake up, you determine how your day will go. Thank you for joining. Have a great day.
Take care.